So let's do something different today. Since this week's short films are on the Green New Deal, as is the reading, it would be pretty redundant if I made two videos on the Green New Deal. So let's take up the climate crisis and justice, which are in many ways related to the Green New Deal. As I repeatedly noted, you're probably tired of hearing me say it, this course focuses on the sort of cultural changes that we need to make in response to the climate crisis. While, as I noted in a previous video, personal actions like switching to largely plant-based diets and away from flying in automobiles are absolutely essential, we need to do more. We need to collectively address this problem. Although the climate crisis is obviously a global problem, different parts of the world, and by that I mean different countries, have their own individual challenges with respect to the crisis. In some, like the US, the challenge is to reel in our environmentally disastrous lifestyle. Economically, this means that we arguably need to enter into a period of degrowth, where we work out just how to live meaningful lives while reducing our population and economy. And in the process, of course, emitting far fewer greenhouse gases. Alternately, in the developing world, the challenge is how to raise the quality of life for everyone, so that everyone there can also live rich and meaningful lives, while not raising greenhouse gas emissions to unacceptable levels in the process, which is, of course, sadly, what the US and the developed world did. Because every country is facing somewhat different problems, the Paris Agreement signed at COP21 in 2015 left decisions on climate action up to individual countries. In some cases, these climate actions may be related, as countries in the developed world and the developing world will both need to rely on renewable energy sources like solar and wind. However, in the developed world, part of the challenge will be to use far less energy than we currently are using. In the developing world, by contrast, the challenge will be to use more energy, such as by electrifying villages across the planet, but to do so responsibly and sustainably. Simply put, the developed world needs to enter a period of degrowth, the developing world sustainable, responsible growth. In both cases, this will involve profound cultural change. Because this is a course taught in the US, it has addressed a range of what we might fairly call first world problems. To much of the world, these may well seem, kind of absurd. So, for example, this course is considered reducing our meat consumption, which is hardly a problem in places like Bangladesh, where the per capita meat consumption is 4 pounds per year. Compare that to 265 pounds per year in the US. To put that in perspective, people in the United States not only eat more meat than in Bangladesh, we eat 66% more. I know it's difficult to even imagine such a huge difference, especially when it comes to food. Nonetheless, the U.S. has an obesity epidemic, which impacts 40% of Americans, while 1 in 10 people across the globe experience chronic hunger daily. Returning to the example of Bangladesh, astonishingly, approximately 40 million people across Bangladesh are starving. And 40% of the country falls under 3 main categories: hunger, starvation, and chronic hunger. So, we've also taken up the issue of air travel. In the U.S., there are 2.5 flights per year per person. While not everyone is taking that many flights, as a country, we obviously fly quite a bit, with frequent flyers flying a great deal more. In contrast, in Bangladesh, just 1 in 55 people fly every year. If you had trouble wrapping your head around the fact that an average American eats 6,600% more meat than the average person in Bangladesh, the difference with air travel is even harder to imagine, as the per capita air travel in the U.S. is 14,000% greater than in Bangladesh. Finally, we've also taken up car ownership, which is hardly a problem in a country like Bangladesh, where only 4 people in 1,000 own a car. In contrast, in the U.S., there are 838 people out of 1,000 owning cars. The difference here is even more mind-boggling, as per capita, that's per person, automobile ownership in the U.S. is 21,000% greater than in Bangladesh, per capita, per person. Recall from the documentary The True Cost that Bangladesh is where the Rana Plaza disaster happened. In case the film left you wondering why people would take jobs in such horrible conditions for such low salary, If 1 in 4 of your friends were starving, it would probably be quite an incentive to take any job on offer. All this brings us to the questions of social justice, environmental justice, and climate justice, which are all related. The horrific conditions under which people are forced to work in Bangladesh is an example of a social justice problem. The environmental damage done to the places by, for example, factories that pollute there, which we often call point source pollution, is an example of environmental justice. The phrase is a little confusing, as we really are talking about injustice here, which includes the fact that these factories are frequently located in areas where people are generally quite poor. Bangladesh is an obvious example, as poverty there is so great that the people have little choice but to take any sort of development that comes along, even if it destroys their local environment. Climate justice looks to how global climate change impacts people across the globe, with the poor being impacted the most. For example, impacted by flooding related to sea level rise. Each year in Bangladesh, 10,000 square miles, that's around 18% of the country, is flooded, killing over 5,000 people and destroying more than 6 million homes. So let me just repeat that. This many people, 5,000, are killed, and this many homes, 7 million, are destroyed each and every year. During severe floods, the affected area may exceed 75% of the country of Bangladesh. The last time that this happened, 30 million people were made homeless. There is an extraordinary, deadly gulf between the wealthiest and poorest people on Earth. It not only impacts our planet's poor directly through things like working conditions, it also indirectly does through contamination of their countries, such as in Bangladesh, and that's environmentally. Climate justice also comes into relief here, as wealthy countries are far better equipped to protect their people from its impact. Take the Thomas Fire, which I previously mentioned in a video, and which came pretty close to my house in December of 2018, and that's, of course, in downtown Santa Barbara. At one point, 8,500 firefighters mobilized to fight it. And then there was the firefighting equipment, including aircraft from across the U.S. and nearly 300 fire engines from 8 nearby states. All told, it cost hundreds of millions of dollars to fight this wildfire. I am, obviously, profoundly grateful for all this, especially for the firefighters who risked their lives putting out this wildfire. But how many countries could afford to mount a response like this? How many would even have the equipment on hand to mobilize? In other words, if I lived pretty much anywhere in the developing world, the Thomas Fire would have destroyed my little house, and it would have burned to the ground along with all my possessions and the rest of my town. Perhaps my family and I would have survived, perhaps not. This is an example of climate justice, or more accurately, climate injustice, in part because my country put 25% of all greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. We now have the wealth to protect ourselves from the devastation that the climate crisis is already bringing to our planet. On the other hand, the 30 million people made homeless by the last great flood in Bangladesh have no such protection. Incidentally, in 2018, the Trump administration slashed funding to Bangladesh to 2/3 the level of the previous administration. The slash was even greater with respect to the health sector, and that's an all-important sector, where funding was reduced to less than half by the Trump administration. So what can be done regarding all this? Yes, we can buy fewer clothes, fewer fast fashion. But what about the social, environmental, and climate justice issues in places like Bangladesh? The Green New Deal, which I think is absolutely necessary, is primarily focused on the U.S. economy. But what responsibility does the U.S. have to the rest of the world, to places like Bangladesh? Specifically, as a trading partner and in terms of social justice, what responsibility do we have to mitigate the sort of cultural problems that led to the Rana Plaza disaster? Regarding environmental justice, should we play a role in making sure that countries like Bangladesh have strong environmental laws which would prevent the production of stuff for the U.S. and the rest of the world from destroying the environment of Bangladesh and other such countries? Finally, with respect to the climate crisis, should we help Bangladesh when they suffer the consequences of it? and help them because we put most of the CO2 in the atmosphere in the developed world? I think these are really important questions to take up.